What really happens when a famous marriage conceals a truth that takes the public decades to discover? Behind the perfect wedding photos lie incredibly complex unions where love, silence, and truths revealed only years later intertwine in ways no one expected. This is part 2, featuring stories even more surprising and intricate. If you haven't seen part 1, watch it right after this video so you don't miss the most memorable cases. And before we begin, please comment, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. When Elsa Lanchester married Charles Laughton in 1929, both were beginning to establish themselves on the British stage. They quickly became a unique artistic couple, sharing a passion for acting and later conquering Hollywood together. According to Elsa's memoirs, a few years after the wedding, Laughton shared with her his attraction to men. This information made their marriage far different from the image of an ordinary artistic couple the public saw from the outside. Elsa chose to stay. Life between the two gradually evolved into a very personal relationship, where friendship, emotional bonding, and artistic passion existed alongside distances in their private lives. Elsa understood that Laughton had a complex inner world, but that did not erase the years they worked together, traveled, and supported each other's careers. Their professional harmony became one of the vital threads that kept their relationship alive for decades.
I am with you.
Love eternal, since yesterday afternoon until tomorrow. I can't love a man with a wife.
On screen, that chemistry left many memorable marks. The two appeared together in works such as The Private Life of Henry VIII Rembrandt and Witness for the Prosecution. Their marriage lasted until Laughton's death in 1962, more than 30 years after their wedding day. Elsa did not look back on that entire period with only bitterness. Her story shows that a marriage can change form over time while still containing friendship, respect, and genuine memories between two people. A pianist entered the world of British politics and was suddenly swept into one of the most famous scandals of the era. Marion Stein married Jeremy Thorpe in 1973 when he was the leader of the Liberal Party and possessed a promising political career. Marion was already familiar with the British elite, following her previous marriage to the Earl of Harewood. However, her life quickly changed as stories regarding Thorpe's past and former model Norman Scott began to appear increasingly in the public eye. Scott claimed he once had an intimate relationship with Thorpe years prior, while Thorpe always denied there was a physical relationship between them. The controversy eventually escalated into a major case far beyond their private lives. In 1979, Thorpe went to trial regarding allegations of a plot to remove Scott from his life. He was acquitted, but his once promising political career was nearly impossible to recover. At that time, Marion was not only the wife of a famous politician, but also had to live under constant media scrutiny. Instead of leaving Thorpe when his reputation collapsed, Marion continued to stand by her husband. She appeared with him during the trial phase and later cared for Thorpe as he lived with Parkinson's disease for many years. Debates about Thorpe's past continued afterward, but Marion rarely turned their private family life into a story for attention. The marriage lasted until her death in 2014, just a few months before Thorpe's. Marion's choice makes her story one of the most complex cases on this list. Millions watched Princess Margaret walk into Westminster Abbey on May 6, 1960. Beside her was Anthony Armstrong Jones, a talented photographer from outside the traditional nobility. Following her failed romance with Peter Townsend, the wedding offered an image of a hopeful new chapter for Queen Elizabeth II's younger sister. Armstrong Jones was later created Earl of Snowdon, and the couple welcomed 2 children, David and Sarah. Early photos showed a modern and glamorous young family amidst a royalty that was still very strict about tradition. But life behind the royal portraits grew increasingly complicated. Armstrong-Jones had a vast social life in the London art scene, and later biographies described numerous extramarital affairs while mentioning long-standing questions surrounding the photographer's romantic life. Margaret also did not live entirely according to traditional molds. The distance between them grew, arguments became frequent, and a marriage once seen as a symbol of a modern royalty began to fracture before the eyes of those close to them. By the 1970s, Margaret had a publicly known relationship with Roddy Llewellyn, a man much younger than her. Photos of them in Mystique caused a wave of attention from the British press. Margaret and Snowdon announced their separation in 1976 and officially divorced in 1978, becoming one of the most notable royal breakups of the 20th century. Behind a wedding ceremony once admired by millions were two strong personalities, complex individual relationships, and a marriage that ultimately could not continue in its original form. Westminster Abbey in 1934 witnessed one of the most prominent royal weddings of the interwar period. Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark married Prince George, the son of King George V and Queen Mary. George was created Duke of Kent, while Marina quickly became one of the most elegant and beloved members of the British royal family. They had 3 children, Edward, Alexandra, and Michael. Before the cameras, their young family represented the perfect image of a royal marriage, meeting every expectation of the era. However, the Duke of Kent's private life had long attracted the attention of biographers. Many later authors described George as having complex romantic relationships and suggested he was attracted to both women and men. Some stories linked his name to figures in London's art world and high society, though many details remain debated among researchers. Marina lived in a world where royal privacy was strictly protected. So much of what occurred within their marriage did not appear in the press during their lifetimes. The marriage did not end in a separation. In August 1942, George died when the military plane carrying him crashed in Scotland during the war. Marina was only 35 and had to raise 3 children, with the youngest, Michael, only a few weeks old. She did not remarry, but continued to perform royal duties for decades thereafter. George passed away too early to fully tell his own story, so much of the picture of his private life was formed only years later through letters, memoirs, and biographical works. In your opinion, how strong did Marina have to be to continue her life and royal responsibilities after the tragedy of 1942? Please share your thoughts in the comments. If you love little-known historical stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. Lavish parties, state visits, and a special position beside the British royalty kept the marriage of Edwina Ashley and Louis Mountbatten glamorous in the public eye. They married in 1922 and had 2 daughters, Patricia and Pamela, but over time their relationship moved away from the traditional marriage model. Mountbatten family documents show that both had outside relationships while maintaining their family social duties and a special bond with each other over many decades. Louis's private life later became a subject of debate in numerous biographies, with allegations that he had relationships with or an attraction to men. Edwina also had a highly publicized romantic life. When the family went to India in 1947, she developed an extremely close relationship with Jawaharlal Nehru. Daughter Pamela later described the affection between her mother and Nehru as deep, while the relationship between the 3, Edwina, Louis, and Nehru, was maintained with unusual respect. What kept Edwina and Louis together seemed to be more than just ordinary marital expectations. They shared children, public responsibilities, and an enduring loyalty, even as each person's emotional life evolved in separate directions. Edwina passed away in 1960 while performing humanitarian work in North Borneo. Although their marriage contained many unusual elements, the bond between them never simply vanished. It was a union that existed through understanding and personal rules that were difficult for outsiders to fully perceive. The doors of the luxurious house in Belgrave Square once opened for royalty, politicians, and the most prominent figures in British society. At the center of that world were Lady Honor Guinness and her American husband, Henry Chips Channon, married in 1933. Honor brought the wealth and connections of the Guinness family, while Chips possessed a nearly limitless social ambition. They quickly became one of high society's most prominent couples. But Chips's private journals later revealed that behind this image was a far more complex marriage. Chips had relationships with both women and men. His full diaries, published many years after his death, recorded a romantic life that the original published version had significantly censored. Among the men mentioned was playwright Terence Rattigan, and landscape designer Peter Coates became a very important person in his life. Honor also had relationships outside the marriage. In their social circle, many close associates likely understood what was happening while the family image was maintained before the public. Ultimately, money status and lavish parties could not keep the two on the same path. Honor and Chips separated around the early 1940s, and the marriage officially ended in divorce in 1945. They had one son, Paul Channon, who later entered British politics. Decades later, the publication of the unexpurgated diaries finally showed the public more clearly the world Honor had lived in. A marriage where affection, ambition, infidelity, and same-sex relationships coexisted behind the perfect facade of the upper class. When Vanessa Redgrave married director Tony Richardson in 1962, both were on the cusp of a brilliant period in British stage and cinema. Richardson was one of the key directors of the New Wave, and Vanessa quickly established her talent within a renowned acting family. They had two daughters, Natasha and Jolie Richardson, both of whom later became famous actresses. However, Tony's private life was more complex than the image of a husband and father the public usually saw. Richardson was confirmed by many biographical sources as bisexual. What makes Vanessa's story different from many other cases is that the marriage did not end because Richardson left her for a man. In 1967, he began a relationship with French actress Jeanne Moreau, and the marriage with Vanessa came to an end. This event shows that Richardson's romantic life could not be reduced to a simple label. He had attractions and relationships with both men and women, while Vanessa had to step out of a 5-year marriage to continue raising her children and building her own path.
I would suggest everybody to come here.
Absolutely. Now, after watching...
Vanessa did not let her first marriage become the story that defined her entire life. Shortly after she met Franco Nero while filming Camelot, and they had a son, Carlo, in 1969. Decades later, Vanessa and Nero finally married. Meanwhile, Richardson continued to make films until the end of his life and passed away in 1991. Looking back, Vanessa's story is not about a woman living in a completely fake marriage, but about loving someone with a complex emotional life and still finding a new path when the marriage could no longer continue. Anna Massey was in her early 20s when she entered a marriage with Jeremy Brett in 1958. Both were born into the world of acting and were building their own careers, making them easily viewed as a promising artistic couple. A year later, they welcomed their son David. However, what seemed like the beginning of a stable family quickly became a volatile period for Anna. The marriage lasted only a few years, and she herself later spoke more publicly about the reasons for the breakdown of her relationship with Brett. According to Anna, Brett left the marriage to be with a man. Subsequently, the actor's private life continued to show relationships with both men and women, He had a long-term relationship with actor Gary Bond from the late 1960s. Brett never publicly identified his sexual orientation, but recorded relationships made his personal life far more complex than the Sherlock Holmes persona millions of fans would later adore. For Anna, more important than any label was that her marriage had ended while she was still very young. Following the divorce, it took Anna many years to rebuild balance in her personal life, but her career grew increasingly solid. She appeared in Peeping Tom Frenzy and numerous stage film and television productions, eventually winning a BAFTA for Hotel du Lac. In 1988, after many years of living alone, she married Uri Andress, and once remarked that her life became happier during this period. Anna's story, therefore, does not end with a failed marriage. It continues with a career spanning over half a century and a more peaceful chapter of her life. Anna Massey's journey shows that a difficult chapter in one's private life does not necessarily determine a person's entire future. What aspect of her story impressed you the most, her strength after the breakdown or the journey to rebuild her life and career? Please leave your thoughts in the comments. If you love little-known stories behind the lives of stars, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to accompany us in future stories. Before Born Free made Virginia McKenna one of the beloved faces of British cinema, she experienced a very short first marriage to Denholm Elliott. They met in the acting world and married in 1954, while both their careers were still developing. However, living together quickly showed they were incompatible. McKenna later recalled Elliott as a wonderful human being and an excellent actor, while admitting the marriage existed only briefly before they went in two different directions. Behind that separation was also a part of his private life that the public at that time knew almost nothing about. Susan Robinson Elliott's second wife later wrote about him and revealed that the actor was bisexual. Biographical documents also state that Elliott's first marriage to Virginia was troubled by outside relationships. In 1950s British society, a male actor publicly acknowledging an attraction to men could face major consequences for his career and reputation, causing many aspects of private life to be known only years later. It is noteworthy that Virginia did not let that short marriage turn into long-lasting resentment. She stated that they later became friends and even worked together many years later. Virginia married actor Bill Travers in 1957, had 4 children, and together they built a life dedicated to cinema and animal protection activities. Looking back at Elliott, she still holds him in high regard. A relationship may end because two people are not right for each other, but that does not necessarily erase the respect they once had for one another. Before stage awards and prominent roles, Sheila Gish once began family life with a young colleague named Roland Curran. They met in the early years of their careers, married, and had 2 daughters, Lou Gish and Kay Curran, both of whom later entered the arts. For many years, they formed a family closely tied to the British stage. To outsiders, that life might have looked quite conventional, but over time, Curran began to better understand and accept an important part of himself. When Sheila and Roland separated, he told his 2 daughters that he was gay. Lou Gish later recalled that moment with humor, showing that within the family, the truth did not entirely take the form of a sudden shock. Roland subsequently lived more openly and had long-term relationships with men. It is remarkable that this change did not turn Sheila and Roland into enemies. Obituaries for Sheila noted that she remained on friendly terms with her ex-husband after the marriage ended. A completely different chapter opened when Sheila met actor Dennis Lawson in 1985 during the production of An Uncertain Feeling. They fell in love and later married, while Roland remained part of a family history that Sheila did not need to erase. She continued to build a distinguished stage career and won an Olivier Award in 1995 for Company. Sheila's story, therefore, does not revolve around who hid what, but rather how a family changes form, accepts a new reality, and can still maintain respect after a marriage concludes. Alan Cumming was only 21 when he married Hilary Lyon in 1985. They met as young actors studying their craft in Scotland, long before Cumming became an international star of Cabaret, The Good Wife, or The Traitors. Years later, Cumming himself admitted he entered the marriage partly out of a longing for stability following his parents' divorce. It was a decision made by two very young people, as both were trying to build careers and imagine what their adult lives would look like. What makes Hilary's story entirely different from many cases on this list is that she knew Alan Cumming was bisexual when they married. Cumming has clearly confirmed this in later interviews. Therefore, this was not a marriage built on him intentionally concealing his orientation from his wife. The two even tried to have children. The marriage lasted 8 years before ending in 1993, at a time when both had matured and life began to lead them in different directions. Following the divorce, Cumming continued to have relationships with both women and men, and then publicly identified as bisexual. He subsequently built a long-term relationship with illustrator Grant Schaefer. Looking back at his first marriage, Cumming does not describe Hilary as a deceived woman, but admits he married too young and for motives that were not yet fully mature. Hilary's story shows that knowing a partner's sexual orientation is not synonymous with being able to predict how a marriage will evolve over many years. For many years, Cheryl Barrymore not only stood by Michael Barrymore, but also contributed to building the persona that the British audience saw on television. They met when Cheryl was still working as a dancer, married in 1976, and she later became a vital manager in her husband's career. Michael rose from a young entertainer to become one of Britain's most famous television stars, particularly with Strike It Lucky and numerous popular variety shows. Behind the glamour, their marriage was increasingly under pressures that the audience could not see. The summer of 1995 became an irreversible turning point. The British press began to publish a flurry of stories about Michael's private life, and the couple announced they were living separately. Not long after, he publicly identified as gay first at a venue in London, and then continuing to speak about it before a wider audience. A marriage that had existed for nearly 2 decades immediately became a media focal point. Cheryl still appeared during that volatile period, but the relationship between them could no longer return to its former state. After some unsuccessful reconciliation attempts, Cheryl and Michael officially divorced in 1997. She later told her story in the memoir Catch a Falling Star, while Michael also offered his perspective on the marriage in subsequent years. Although the relationship ultimately became strained, Michael later still called Cheryl the greatest love of his life and insisted that the affection between them had once been real. Cheryl's story thus contains a paradox. A marriage can end after a profound change, but the years of love before that were not necessarily fake as a result. What detail in Cheryl and Michael's marriage made you think the most? Please share your feelings in the comments. If you want to continue exploring little-known stories behind the lives of celebrities, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. The stadium was once where Gareth Thomas felt strongest, but off the field, he concealed an important part of himself for many years. Gareth married Gemma Thomas, whom he had known since his school days in 2001. At that time, he was already one of Welsh rugby's biggest stars. While the public saw a powerful athlete with a stable family life, Gareth later admitted that he had known he was attracted to men since his teenage years, but found it very difficult to accept. The summer of 2006 became the moment everything changed. Gareth told Gemma he was gay, and the marriage began to move toward its conclusion. He described confessing the truth to the wife who had trusted him as one of the most painful moments in that journey. Gemma did not turn the story into a confrontation before the media. On the contrary, Gareth stated that she supported him in preparing to live more openly. They separated, and the divorce procedures were finalized before Gareth's life entered a completely different chapter. In 2009, Gareth publicly identified as gay, becoming one of Britain's most prominent professional athletes to do so while still active in elite sports. He admitted that years of hiding had affected not only himself, but also those close to him, especially Gemma. Therefore, her story lies not just in the end of the marriage, but in how a person must rebuild their future after things once thought certain suddenly change. Gemma chose privacy, while Gareth frequently looked back at the past with remorse and gratitude. Just before entering a family with ties to the British royalty, Penny Thompson knew something very important about the man she was preparing to marry. Lord Ivar Mountbatten later revealed that he told Penny before the wedding that he was bisexual and had attractions to both men and women. Penny still chose to build a life with him. They married in 1994, had 3 daughters, and created a family that existed for 17 years before the marriage ended in 2011. Thus, Penny's story is entirely different from the image of a wife unexpectedly discovering her husband's secret after many years. Ivar said she understood it from the beginning, and he was always grateful for her sympathy. But understanding a person's sexual orientation does not mean knowing where a marriage will go. Ivar later explained that Penny needed to feel more love than he could provide. They separated without turning their shared history into a public battle, while continuing to care for their 3 children together. In 2016, Ivar spoke publicly about being gay and introduced his partner, James Coyle. Penny and the children supported him as he entered a new phase, creating a rare conclusion for a marriage that had completely changed form. Family relationships have been maintained post-divorce, and Penny continues to have close ties with those in royal circles. Her story shows that honesty before marriage does not guarantee 2 people will stay together forever, but it can help respect survive even when they choose different paths. A recording studio rather than a lavish party brought Renata Blauel close to Elton John. The German sound engineer met him during the production of the album Too Low for Zero in 1983. They shared a passion for music and quickly became close. Only a year later, on Valentine's Day 1984, the two held their wedding in Australia. The event surprised many because Elton had previously spoken publicly about being bisexual, but for Renata, the marriage was not simply an image for the public. Four years later, the marriage ended in divorce. Elton later lived openly as a gay man and looked back at the period with Renata with regret many times. In his memoir, he admitted he had hurt someone who loved him and stated that the breakup did not turn into a public retaliation. Renata chose a path nearly opposite to her ex-husband's fame. She avoided interviews, did not build a name for herself from the marriage, and spent many years living out of the media spotlight. That silence became the most prominent feature of her post-divorce life. More than 3 decades later, Renata's name appeared in the press again when she sued Elton regarding details about their marriage mentioned in his memoir Me and the film Rocket Man. The case was resolved in 2020 with a joint statement emphasizing the desire to protect Renata's privacy and a commitment that both sides would not continue to comment on the marriage. That conclusion is very fitting with how she has lived for years not seeking fame from the past. Renata's story reminds us that behind a global music icon is a person who once chose to leave the spotlight to keep her life for herself. These marriages show that behind the glamour status and seemingly perfect photos, there are always stories the public cannot fully see. There are relationships that end, people who still choose to stay, and truths only known years later. Of all the stories in Part 2, which character surprised you the most? Please share your thoughts in the comments, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next special stories.